The crystalline towers of Nova Prime pierced the alien sky like shards of frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the harsh light of 3 moons. James Reynolds crouched in the shadow of a twisted metal sculpture, his tactical gear blending seamlessly with the darkness. The prison complex loomed before him, a monument to the Novarian Empire's power and cruelty. His mission was simple on paper: infiltrate the facility and extract the prisoner from cell block Delta. The reality, as always, was far more complicated. James checked his wrist computer, noting the patrol patterns of the guards. Their tall, silvery forms moved with an unnatural grace that reminded him they were nothing like humans, despite their humanoid appearance. "Target location confirmed," whispered the AI in his earpiece. "Cell block Delta, level 3. Security presence, heavy." James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his modified pulse rifle against his back. The Resistance had paid him well for this mission, but something felt different about this one. The intel was too specific, the target too important, and the security too intense for a simple prisoner extraction. The perimeter fence hummed with energy fields strong enough to vaporize any unauthorized visitor. James retrieved a small device from his belt, a prototype override module that cost him most of his previous mission's payment. He placed it against the fence's control node and waited. 3 seconds later, a small section of the barrier flickered and died. Moving like a shadow, James slipped through the gap. The prison's inner courtyard was a maze of automated turrets and motion sensors. He activated his stealth suit, the advanced camouflage technology rendering him nearly invisible. The suit had been borrowed from a Novarian military facility 6 months ago, another mission that had nearly cost him his life. As he approached the main building, a guard patrol rounded the corner. James pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. The Novarian guards passed within inches, their bioluminescent eyes scanning the darkness. One guard paused, head tilting slightly, but after a moment they moved on. The building's access terminal required biometric authentication. James pulled out a synthetic skin patch and pressed it against the scanner. The Resistance's forgery work was perfect, the system accepted the fake prints without hesitation. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Cell block Delta was 5 levels up. James opted for the maintenance shaft over the main elevator, climbing swiftly and silently. His enhanced strength, courtesy of military-grade augmentations, made the ascent effortless. Level 3's security was even tighter. Patrol drones buzzed through the corridors like mechanical insects, their sensors sweeping every corner. James waited for a gap in the patrol pattern, then sprinted down the corridor. Cell block Delta was ahead, its reinforced door a formidable barrier. He pulled out his decryption tool and got to work. The lock was complex, but not impossible. After 30 seconds of tense waiting, the door clicked open. The cell block was dimly lit, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. Most cells were empty, but at the far end, one containment field hummed with energy. As James approached, he saw her. The prisoner was nothing like he expected. She stood tall and proud despite her restraints, her skin a pale lavender that seemed to shimmer in the low light. Her hair, a striking silver white, floated around her head as if suspended in water. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard, deep violet and filled with an intelligence that made him pause. "You're late," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly melody. "I was beginning to think they'd sent someone incompetent." James blinked, thrown off balance. "You were expecting me?" A slight smile curved her lips. "My name is Arya. And you're going to help me escape this place, James Reynolds." The fact that she knew his name sent warning bells ringing through his mind. This was definitely not a standard extraction. "How do you know your name?" She stepped closer to the containment field, her movement graceful despite her bonds. "I know many things. Including why they really sent you to free me. But right now, we need to move." The guard rotation changes in exactly 3 minutes, and I'd rather not be here when it does. James hesitated for only a moment before moving to the control panel. His decryption tool made quick work of the containment field, and the energy barrier dissolved with a crackle. Arya stepped forward, rubbing her wrists where the restraints had been. "We need to move," James said, pushing his questions aside for now. "Can you run?" Arya's answer was to move past him with fluid grace, her bare feet silent on the metal floor. "Lead the way, James. And do try to keep up." The alarms began to blare just as they reached the maintenance shaft. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in crimson as security doors began to slam shut throughout the facility. James pulled Arya into the shaft just as heavy footsteps thundered past their position. As they descended, James couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was about to become far more complicated than he'd bargained for. Arya moved with too much confidence for a prisoner, knew too much for someone who'd been locked away. But right now, his job was to get her out alive. The questions could wait. What he didn't know was that this night would change not only his life but the fate of 2 civilizations. And it all began with a prison break that was about to become a legend. The forest moon of Nova Prime was nothing like the pristine cities above. Ancient trees towered hundreds of feet into the purple-tinged sky, their twisted branches creating a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight. James and Arya moved swiftly through the underbrush, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant with each passing minute. "Your stealth skills are impressive for a prisoner," James said as they paused behind a massive trunk, his breath steadied despite their pace. The prison searchlights swept through the canopy above them, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. Arya's violet eyes gleamed in the darkness. "And your suspicion is understandable for a mercenary," she replied, a hint of amusement in her melodic voice. "But now isn't the time for questions." As if to emphasize her point, the whine of hoverbikes cut through the night air. James grabbed Arya's arm and pulled her into a hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree. They pressed close together in the confined space, barely breathing as the patrol passed overhead. "They're using thermal scanners," James whispered, checking his wrist computer. "This hollow is lined with minerals that should mask our signatures, but we can't stay here long." Arya nodded, her silver-white hair brushing against his chest. "The Resistance has a safe house 3 kilometers east. We need to reach it before dawn." James stiffened. "How do you know about the Resistance?" "The same way I knew your name," she said, her expression becoming serious. "I have abilities your people don't understand yet. Abilities that made me valuable to both the Empire and the Resistance." Before James could respond, his wrist computer chirped a warning. A squadron of combat drones was approaching their position, their sensors far more sophisticated than the hoverbikes. "We need to move. Now." They emerged from the hollow and sprinted through the forest, James leading them through the densest parts of the undergrowth where the drone sensors would have the most difficulty tracking them. Arya kept pace effortlessly, her movements almost ethereal as she navigated the treacherous terrain. A drone suddenly burst through the canopy above them, its targeting systems locking on. James raised his pulse rifle, but before he could fire, Arya raised her hand. The drone froze in mid-air, its systems crackling with energy, then exploded in a shower of sparks. James stared at her in disbelief. "What did you?" Later, she cut him off, pulling him forward. "More are coming." They ran until they reached a steep ravine, the sound of a rushing river echoing from below. The patrol's lights were getting closer, and the whine of more drones filled the air. James quickly assessed their options, none of them good. "We'll have to jump," Arya said, reading his thoughts. "The river's deep enough." James shook his head. "The current's too strong. We'd be swept away." Arya's hand found his in the darkness. "Trust me, James. Like I trusted you to free me." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. The searchlights were almost upon them when James nodded. Together, they leaped into the darkness. The water was shockingly cold, but as they plunged beneath the surface, James felt Arya's hand tighten around his. A strange energy seemed to envelope them, and suddenly they were moving through the water with impossible speed and precision, avoiding rocks and debris that should have torn them apart. They emerged from the river nearly a kilometer downstream, gasping for air but alive. James looked at Arya with new eyes as she wrung water from her silver hair. "You're not just a political prisoner, are you?" She smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. "No, I'm not. I'm something the Empire fears far more than a dissident. I'm proof that their carefully ordered universe isn't what they claim it to be." James helped her up the riverbank, his tactical training warring with his growing curiosity. "And the resistance? What do they want with you?" "Hope," she said simply. "I represent hope for change. But the truth is more complicated than either side understands." She stepped closer to him, her violet eyes intense. "You saved me because you were paid to, James. But I chose you because you're different. You see beyond the surface, beyond the divisions between our peoples." The sound of distant engines reminded them they weren't safe yet. James checked his waterproof equipment, plotting a course to the safe house. "We should keep moving. Whatever you are, whatever's really going on here, we need to get somewhere secure first." Arya nodded, but as they began moving again, she spoke softly. "When we're safe, I'll show you everything. Why I was imprisoned, what I can do, and why it matters for both our worlds. But for now, know this, saving me wasn't just another mission. It was the beginning of something much bigger." As they made their way through the darkened forest, James couldn't shake the feeling that his life had irrevocably changed the moment he'd opened that cell. Arya moved beside him like a ghost, her presence both comforting and unsettling. She was right, this was more than a mission now. It was becoming something he never expected, something that made his heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with danger. The safe house lay ahead, and with it, answers to questions he hadn't even known to ask. But one thing was already clear, Arya wasn't just a prisoner he'd freed. She was a mystery that would either save two worlds or tear them apart, and somehow, he'd become part of her story. The Resistance safehouse was hidden beneath an ancient processing facility, its entrance concealed by years of natural growth and deliberate camouflage. James guided Arya through a series of security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last. The final door opened to reveal a surprisingly well-equipped facility, humming with advanced technology. They were greeted by Commander Rylan, a grizzled veteran of the Resistance whose cybernetic eye scanned them both as they entered. His scarred face remained impassive, but James noticed how he straightened almost imperceptibly when he saw Arya. "You actually did it," Rylan said, his voice rough from years of breathing toxic atmosphere on the outer colonies. "Though I suspect our guest made it easier than expected." Arya stepped forward, her presence somehow filling the room despite her simple prison garments. "You've risked much to free me, Commander. But you don't fully understand what you've unleashed." "Then enlighten us," James said, moving to stand beside her. "I think we've earned some answers." Rylan motioned them to follow. They descended deeper into the facility, passing through rooms filled with Resistance members working at various stations. Each person they passed stopped to stare at Arya, their expressions a mix of awe and uncertainty. They entered a secure briefing room, its walls lined with holographic displays showing tactical data from across the sector. As the door sealed behind them, Arya turned to face them both. "My people are known as the Lumini," she began, her voice taking on a formal tone. "We were here long before the Novarian Empire, before even your people reached the stars. We chose to remain hidden, watching as younger races developed and spread across the galaxy." She raised her hand, and the air around them shimmered. Suddenly, the room was filled with stunning holographic images, ancient cities that seemed to be made of pure light, beings of incredible beauty and power moving through the cosmos with ease. The Empire discovered our existence by accident, she continued. A scout ship crashed on one of our hidden worlds. Instead of reaching out in peace, they saw us as a threat to their power. My capture was meant to be the first step in their plan to eliminate us. James watched the images swirl around them, mesmerized. But why you specifically? Arya's violet eyes met his. Because I am what my people call a nexus, a living bridge between different forms of consciousness. I can connect with other minds, see the threads that bind all living things together. The Empire believes they can use my abilities to locate and destroy my people. And the resistance? James asked, though he was beginning to understand. Commander Rylan stepped forward. We've been fighting the Empire for decades, but we're losing. When we learned about Arya's people, we saw hope. A chance for an alliance that could change everything. But it's not that simple, Arya said softly. Her hand brushed against James's arm, and suddenly his mind was flooded with images, glimpses of her memories, the pain of captivity, the weight of responsibility she carried. He gasped at the intensity of the connection. The Empire isn't just afraid of our power, she continued. They're afraid of what we represent. The Lumini believe in the fundamental interconnectedness of all species, all consciousness. Our very existence threatens their ideology of superiority and control. James steadied himself, still reeling from the mental contact. That's why they kept you isolated. They were afraid you'd connect with others, show them the truth. Yes, she smiled, and for a moment he saw the loneliness she carried. But they couldn't completely isolate me. I reached out, searching for someone who could help. That's how I found you, James. Your mind was different. Open. Questioning. Commander Rylan cleared his throat. We need to move quickly. The Empire will be searching every sector for you both. We have a plan to. The facility's alarms suddenly blared to life. Red emergency lights began flashing as security alerts flooded the tactical displays. Multiple Imperial warships just dropped out of hyperspace, a voice announced over the comm system. They're launching drop ships. Ground forces incoming. Rylan cursed, moving to the tactical console. They must have tracked us somehow. We need to evacuate immediately. But Arya shook her head, her expression grave. No. They tracked me. The experiments they performed, they found a way to trace my energy signature. As long as I'm here, everyone is in danger. James caught her arm as she turned toward the door. Where do you think you're going? I have to leave. Draw them away from. No, he said firmly, surprising himself with the intensity of his response. We didn't come this far to give up now. There has to be another way. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, the connection between them flared again. James felt her fear, not for herself but for others, for him. And underneath it, something else, something growing stronger with each passing moment. There might be a way, she said finally. But it's dangerous, and I'll need your help. Both of you. She looked between James and Rylan. What I'm about to suggest goes against everything my people believe in, but sometimes to save what matters most, we have to be willing to break our own rules. Outside, the sound of Imperial drop ships grew closer. Time was running out. But as James looked at Arya, saw the determination in her violet eyes, he knew he would follow her plan, whatever it might be. Because somewhere between freeing her from that cell and standing here now, his mission had become something more personal, more vital than any contract. The Empire was coming, but they were about to learn that some bonds couldn't be broken by force, and some truths couldn't be contained by chains. The underground facility shook with the impact of Imperial bombardment. James, Arya, and Commander Rylan raced through the corridors toward the facility's lower levels, where Arya claimed their only hope waited. The Empire's ships are targeting defense grid nodes, Rylan reported, checking his tactical display. They're trying to cut off our escape routes systematically. That's not their primary objective, Arya said, her silver hair streaming behind her as they ran. They're establishing a containment field. They don't just want to capture me, they want to ensure I can't reach out to my people. They reached a massive vault door, its surface covered in warnings in multiple languages. Arya placed her hand on the control panel, and the air around it shimmered with that strange energy James was starting to recognize. Before they imprisoned me, I managed to hide something here, she explained as the door began to open. Something that could change everything. The vault contained a single pedestal, and on it floated a crystal that seemed to be made of pure starlight. As they approached, James felt a subtle resonance, like music just below the threshold of hearing. "This is a Nexus crystal," Arya said, her voice filled with reverence. "It amplifies our natural abilities. With it, I can reach across light years, contact my people, and show the Empire the truth they've tried so hard to deny." Another explosion rocked the facility. "Whatever you're planning, do it fast," Rylan urged, his cybernetic eye scanning multiple threat feeds. "We've got Imperial elite guards breaching the upper levels." Arya lifted the crystal, and it pulsed in response to her touch. "James," she said softly, turning to him. "What I'm about to do. I need your help. Your mind, your strength. But it has to be your choice." He stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't explain. "What exactly are you asking?" "A joining of minds, deeper than before. You would be my anchor, keeping me connected to this reality while I reach across space. But it's dangerous. You would see everything I am, and I would see everything you are. There can be no barriers between us." James looked into her violet eyes, seeing the weight of what she was asking. Since freeing her from that cell, he'd felt something growing between them, something that defied the boundaries of their different species, their different worlds. "I'm not afraid," he said, reaching for her hand. The moment their fingers touched, with her holding the crystal between them, the world exploded into light. James gasped as his consciousness expanded. He saw through Arya's eyes, the vast tapestry of existence, countless minds shining like stars in an infinite web of connection. He felt her people out there, hiding but watching, waiting. And he felt her, all of her, her strength, her fears, her growing feelings for him. Through their connection, Arya began to reach out, using the crystal's power to call to her people. But as she did, James sensed another presence. The Empire's ships above weren't just trying to contain them, they were waiting for this moment. "Arya, wait," he called out, both with his voice and mind. "It's a trap. They wanted you to use the crystal. They're tracking its energy signature." She pulled back just as a massive surge of energy descended from above, trying to lock onto the crystal's power. James instinctively pulled her close, trying to shield her with his body and mind. The crystal pulsed between them, and suddenly James understood. The Empire couldn't track what they didn't understand. And what they didn't understand was that true power came not from control, but from connection. "Trust me," he whispered to Arya, and felt her response, not in words, but in the complete openness of her mind to his. Together, they let the crystal's energy flow through them both. Instead of reaching out to the stars, they turned its power inward, creating something new, a fusion of human determination and Lamini wisdom. The Empire's tracking beam hit them, but instead of finding a single powerful source, it scattered across countless smaller connections. Every resistance member in the facility, every living thing for miles around, became part of a network too complex to track or contain. Through their joined consciousness, James and Arya began to share their truth, not just with her people, but with everyone. Imperial soldiers saw through their victims' eyes. Resistance fighters felt the fear of their enemies. The barriers between minds began to crumble. "It's working," Rylan said in awe, watching as reports came in of Imperial forces standing down, of ships' crews refusing orders to fire. "They're beginning to understand." But James barely heard him. He was lost in the connection with Arya, in the perfect understanding between them. In her mind, he saw what she'd known since she first touched his consciousness, that some souls were meant to find each other across any distance, any difference. The crystal's light began to fade, but the connection between them remained. As reality slowly returned to normal, James found himself still holding Arya, their foreheads touching, breath mingling. "I never thought," she whispered, "that in finding freedom, would also find you." The facility shook again, but this time it was from Imperial ships pulling back, their crews too shaken by their glimpse of unity to continue fighting. The revolution they'd started wouldn't be won with weapons, but with understanding. As James helped Arya steady herself, still dizzy from their shared experience, he knew that everything had changed. The barriers between their peoples were beginning to fall, and in that change was hope for a new future. But more than that, he had found something he never knew he was looking for, a connection that transcended the physical, a love that bridged the stars themselves. The aftermath of the crystal's power left the Imperial forces in disarray. As the sun rose over Nova Prime's forest moon, the Resistance facility hummed with activity. Reports streamed in from across the sector, Imperial ships standing down, soldiers laying down their weapons, and most importantly, the Lumini beginning to emerge from hiding. James stood at a viewport, watching as the first Lumini ships descended through the atmosphere, their crystalline hulls catching the light like frozen rainbows. Arya stood beside him, her hand intertwined with his, their shared consciousness still humming softly in the background of their thoughts. "Your people are beautiful," James said softly, watching as more ships appeared. Each vessel seemed to be grown rather than built, organic technology beyond anything he'd seen before. "They're your people now too," Arya replied, squeezing his hand. Through their connection, he felt her joy at reunion mingled with something deeper, her certainty about their shared future. "What we created together, that bond, it's unprecedented in my people's history. A human and a Lumini, bridging not just minds but hearts." Commander Rylan approached, his cybernetic eye whirring as it processed the spectacular sight above. "The Imperial High Command is in chaos. Half their fleet has declared independence, and the rest are calling for negotiations. Whatever you two did with that crystal, it changed everything." "We showed them the truth," Arya said. "That separation is an illusion. That beneath our different forms, we're all connected. Some of them were ready to understand that truth. Others will take time." James felt a ripple of concern through their bond. "But not everyone will accept this change easily," he said, voicing her unspoken worry. "There will be resistance, especially from those who built their power on division. Which is why what comes next is just as important as what we've achieved here." Arya turned to face him fully, her violet eyes intense. "My people want me to help lead the negotiations with both the Empire and the human colonies. To build something new from the ashes of the old order. But I won't do it without you." James raised an eyebrow. "I'm just a mercenary. Diplomacy isn't exactly my strong suit." Arya's laugh was like music. "You're far more than that, James Reynolds. You're the man who saw past every barrier to find me. Who trusted me enough to share his mind and heart completely. The galaxy needs more of that courage now." Through their connection, James felt the truth of her words, saw himself through her eyes, not just a skilled operative, but a bridge between worlds, someone who could help others understand what they had discovered together. The facility's communication system suddenly came alive with urgent signals. Commander Ryland checked the feeds, his expression growing serious. "The Imperial Remnant Fleet is mobilizing. Those still loyal to the old regime. They're saying they'd rather burn it all down than accept change." "Then we'll face them together," James said, his grip tightening on Arya's hand. "All of us." Arya nodded, and through their bond, he felt her drawing on the crystal's remaining power. Above them, the Lumini ships began to move in perfect synchronization, their formations creating patterns of light that seemed to dance through space. My people have hidden long enough, Arya declared. It's time to show that unity is stronger than fear. The next hours were a blur of action. James found himself coordinating between resistance forces, converted Imperial ships, and the Lumini fleet. His military experience combined with his connection to Arya made him the perfect liaison. Together, they created a strategy that wasn't about destruction, but containment and understanding. When the Imperial remnant attacked, they found themselves facing not just superior numbers, but a fundamentally new way of warfare. The Lumini ships moved in perfect harmony with their allies, their advanced technology amplified by the power of true cooperation. Many of the remnant crews, already shaken by their exposure to the crystal's revelations, found themselves unwilling to fire on those they now recognized as kin. The battle, if it could be called that, was over in hours. The remnant fleet surrendered, their crews joining the growing movement for change that was spreading across the sector. As the adrenaline of conflict faded, James found himself standing with Arya in the facility's garden dome, watching all three of Nova Prime's moons rise into the purple sky. "So what happens now?" he asked, though through their connection, he already felt the shape of her answer. "Now we build something new," she said, turning to face him. "The Lumini cannot return to hiding, and the Empire cannot return to its old ways. We need to create a new understanding between all our peoples." She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "And I need you beside me. Not just as an advisor or protector, but as my partner in all things." James leaned into her touch, feeling the depth of their connection hum between them. "I never expected this," he admitted. "When I took that mission, I thought I was just freeing a prisoner. Instead, you freed yourself," Arya finished. "We both did. And in finding each other, we helped free countless others." Above them, the moons cast their light through the dome's crystal panels, creating patterns that seemed to dance across their skin, human and Lumini, yet somehow perfectly matched. James pulled Arya close, and as their lips met, their shared consciousness sang with the promise of a future neither of them could have imagined alone. The revolution they had started would take years to fully unfold. There would be challenges ahead, resistance to change, and hard work to be done. But together, they had proven that the strongest chains, those of fear, prejudice, and isolation, could be broken by the power of connection. And in breaking free, they had found something greater than either of them had ever dreamed possible. As the night deepened around them, James and Arya remained in each other's arms, their minds and hearts intertwined, two souls who had found each other across the vast distances of space and difference. They were living proof that love could transcend any barrier, bridge any gap, and light the way toward a future where no one had to remain imprisoned, by walls, by fear, or by the inability to see the beauty in those different from themselves.